Thank you. Former Congressman Jim Marshall, would you do me a favor and join us at the table, please? Thank you. I'd like to first thank you all for being involved, I think, in this very important project in terms of seeing where we can cut costs without compromising national security and see where the needs in terms of prioritizing them are in terms of our national defense. There are several issues I want to raise, and that is former Secretary of Defense Robert Gates, before he left, I think told this committee on several times, on several occasions, that the trajectory of personnel costs, the rise in personnel costs, are going to eat into acquisition costs, that at some time, if left unchecked, we will become a hollow force. And so let me raise to you a couple issues. One is what I sense here is cultural or institutional friction between the active duty component and the Guard and Reserves when it comes to the allocation of resources between the two. I think, as someone who served in the Army, Army Reserve, Marine Corps Reserve, that we can transfer capability to the Guard and Reserve at a cost savings without compromising national security. We may have to restructure certain things, like, for instance, say that it's when it becomes from an operational to a strategic force, that it's no longer 2 weeks out of the year or 1 week in a month, that we need more training than that in order to maintain effectiveness. But I think that there's a savings. I think if you compare the cost of an active duty Sergeant E5 to a reservist Sergeant E5, I think it's about the third of a cost for non-deployed. But then when you take in the legacy savings or legacy cost of retirement, then that savings is a lot more. I wonder if you all could comment on shifting capability to the Guard and Reserve as a cost-saving measure.
I think in certain areas that can make a lot of sense. I think, but it needs to be driven by a sense of what are the capabilities we need in the future, which are best sort of parked in the reserve. Where do we need that surge capacity, and how, and is the reserve, are the Guard and Reserves the right place to hold that, and so forth? Are there specific skill sets where they're particularly prevalent in the civilian side, and you want to leverage those? So I think it's in certain cases it may well apply. As a general across the board principle, I'd be a little less comfortable with it, but I think in certain cases it is exactly as you describe. And
sure, I mean, I think that there are expeditionary units that you probably wouldn't want to be in that there, but there are, say, combat service support elements that, particularly higher echelon, that have a strong civilian nexus professionally, that you would do for a savings. Congressman Marshall.
This particular conversation is one that we sort of had in the panel discussions and concluded that we just had such a broad difference of views on this, and it would take so much of our time and probably resources to try and figure it out that we just wouldn't get into that. And that's one of the reasons why you didn't see a lot of discussion of this in the panel's report. The other thing is that we were very careful to say that we encouraged the Congress to urge the Department to go through another QDR. Now that I've heard both Secretary Florin and Ambassador Edelman describe how unpleasant that is for the Department, and how it might itself need to be restructured, I'm not so sure that they need to be directed to go through another QDR, but go through another process that's not so resource constrained, thinking about what our strategic needs are and letting the strategic needs drive the budgeting decisions as opposed to the opposite. And in the process of doing that, among the things that we thought might occur were the things that we listed, but we were very careful to say, we think, we don't know, because we didn't have the capacity to determine what the end strength should be, what the appropriate relationship between Guard and Reserve and active duty should be. My own view has been for really quite some time that it would be far more cost-effective and strategically smart for a number of different reasons, to rely more on Guard and Reserve than we do right now. So I agree with your observation, and the questions by Mr. Paluzzo and Mr. Larson and a few others that there wasn't much of a discussion of this in the National Defense Panel's report is largely because we sort of talked about it a little bit and then concluded this is well beyond the capability of the panel to come up with the analysis that needs to be done in order to figure what's the right balance. I appreciate you calling me to the table. It gives me an opportunity to say that just the testimony by both Michelle and Eric evidences conclusively what I've been saying for quite some time, that both of them would make excellent Secretaries of Defense.
Okay.
Very balanced, very bright, very informed.
Thank you.
And I also wanted to make a couple of structural observations that need to be taken into account as we think about how the world's going to work, and more specifically how the Defense Department ought to be working in the future. You see throughout business this global trend and the elimination of middle management. I mean, that middle management is just being cut out, and it's because modern-day communication and IT, those two combined, enable management to not have to rely upon levels and levels and levels of middle management. When you put that into a government setting, it means that ambassadors are kind of frustrated because they don't quite have the they don't have the State Department relying upon them as much as the State Department used to rely upon them, because the State Department and people here in Washington can sort of reach right through them and make decisions concerning what's going on in different countries without having to rely too much upon the in-country team. Same thing's going to happen where the Defense Department, or is happening where the Defense Department is concerned, and it might explain in part why so much more is being done from a White House perspective as opposed to just relying upon the Secretary. That's one observation, and it's a trend that's going to continue, and it's something that the committee is going to have to take into account in trying to figure out what the right balance and authorities would be. The other is sort of a true confessions thing by me. I thought that Michelle was very generous to the committee in saying that the committee is well aware of all these problems and is trying to persuade the rest of the Congress what Congress needs to do in order to right these problems. That's true on the macro issue concerning funding, but it's not so true on the more micro issues associated with actual management of the department. The reality is that the committee is made up of characters like me. Why did I become a member of this committee? Well, I had a military background, but my principal background when I came to Congress was finance. And it would have been natural for me to get on the Financial Services Committee. That's where my expertise was. I'd been in the military, and that's about it. After that, I was doing other stuff. Why did I become a member of the Armed Services Committee? Because it was good for my politics. Why was it good for my politics? It was good for my politics because the largest employer in my district happens to be Warner Robins Air Base. And when I described what I had to do, what my job was as a representative elected from my district in Middle Georgia, I was quite frank. I would say job number one for me is jobs for my district, and the largest job producer, the largest number of jobs, the economy of the district is dependent upon Warner Robins Air Force Base. So in Congress, I had protect Robins Air Force Base as number one, grow Robins Air Force Base is number two. And that's true of most of the members on the committee, and we all know that's the case.
Let me throw in a question about that, and I'll ask concluding remarks when we wrap up.
I'm sorry.
On the base realignment closure process, and I would agree with you that there is a surplus capacity, and those are wasted defense dollars. And the BRAC process, though, only looks at bases inside the United States. And so we're asking folks, like former Representative Marshall, but that are on this committee today, that have those same economic interests, to potentially close one of their bases. At the same time, the BRAC process does not take into account overseas military operations where there are, where you have base housing, where you have all of the infrastructure supporting families that could in fact be supplanted by rotational forces, by major joint military exercises. Why shouldn't they be in the mix in the consideration in terms of the BRAC process?
The truth is, Congressman, that because we haven't had, the Department has not been able to execute any further backgrounds for several years, the primary base closures have occurred abroad. If you look at the posture in Europe, it's come down to something close to bare bones. You look at the posture in Asia. This is an area where we say we want to put greater emphasis. Still, we've consolidated and closed bases there because the services couldn't touch domestic basing. So the only place they could take money out of infrastructure overseas. So I think if you looked at where overseas infrastructure has been from the end of the Cold War till today, you will see a very dramatic reduction in that I think is, has the potential to go beyond what's in our strategic interests. And so it's not that it's been off the table. It's been the only place where the services could cut for several years.
But as somebody that's been deployed in those facilities, I think it's an archaic notion to, when we have the ability to do joint military exercises, to demonstrate our commitment to our allies, when we have the ability to use rotational forces in the place of having these fixed permanent facilities, that I just think that from a standpoint of equity to the American people, to districts that have large the defense, that these bases are a big economic component of their district. I think from the standpoint of equity, they ought to be in the mix. They ought to be in the mix in terms of that. Let me go to another issue, and that is that I think we have a dinosaur of a retirement system that is in the military. And I think that we can, in fact, come up with a new system that will better serve our military, better serve the taxpayers of this country, and grandfather in those who are currently on active duty with an option of coming in a new system if they want to. And I think that the new system would be part defined benefit, where based on the number of years served, based on the rank retired at, or maybe they would be vested after 5 years, just to throw that out. And then part 401k, part like a TSP program for federal employees. So I think you have those two component parts. But I think if I were a young soldier, again, just enlisting in the military or even a junior officer when I was in the Marine Corps, that I would have opted for such a system. And out of the system that says you have to be 20 years. And if you're anything less than 20 years, there's a prospect of you leaving the military with no retirement benefits whatsoever. I mean, I think that unless, Congress in a reduction in force agrees to do some sort of severance package, but that's not, there's no requirement for that. And so I'd like your comment on that.
I think this is, you're absolutely on the right track, Congressman. I'm hoping that the compensation review committee that you all put in place will report back with some strong recommendations in this area. It's an area that we did not get into detail as the NDP, knowing that compensation and benefits committee was reviewing this. But the idea that 80% plus of our servicemen and women walk away with nothing because they don't make it to 20 years, to me, doesn't sound like the right retirement system. So I think there are changes to compensation and benefits that grandfathering in the commitments we've already made, but going forward could be both more equitable and more cost-effective for the department.
Any other comments on that? Well, I'd love to hear concluding remarks from each of you in terms of your observations of the process. Ambassador, why don't we start with you?
Well, I actually think, from my point of view, this was a terrific process. I think that Congress is well served by getting a second opinion on the QDR. And I think that the panel that we had which was somewhat serendipitously chosen because, of course, it's chosen by the chairman and ranking members of the committees into the two bodies, and then the SecDef choosing two chairmen. We ended up with a panel I thought that was extremely collegial, dedicated to looking at the problem of national defense, not only, as Secretary Perry said, in a bipartisan way, but in a nonpartisan way. And so I think the report that we were able to come up with, given the diverse backgrounds that we brought to this and diverse kind of political commitments of one sort or another, I think stands the nation in good stead, and I hope stands you and your colleagues in good stead.
Ms. Flournoy?
Well, thank you very much for this hearing and for the support for the panel's work. We really tried to issue a call to action, and my hope is that this report will help to frame some of the debate and discussion for the new Congress to take action on some of these issues. We really cannot wait 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, 10 years. And so I hope that this will provide grist for your mill as you engage not only the members of this committee, but the other members in this body to take action to align our investment in our military with our strategy and the leadership role we need to play in the world.
Thank you. Former Congressman Jim Marshall.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate that. It was a real honor and pleasure for me to serve on the committee, on the panel rather, and I found it to be a group of very diverse, very well-informed, very well-intentioned people who recognized that we didn't have the time nor the analytical capability to do what really ought to be done where planning is concerned. So you see that the report intentionally stayed pretty top level. It tried to offer language that could be used by members of Congress for arguing the case for increased funding, which is critical. You've heard that repeatedly today, and I think everybody already knows that. But how do you persuade Congress this is the case? Among the things that we observed in our report was not only that it was a serious strategic misstep for a couple of reasons. One is, obviously, the force is weaker, not as ready. We're at higher risk, and at some point we're going to be at extremely high risk if we don't reverse this. The other is it makes no financial sense. The cuts were intended to somehow assist us where the bottom line is concerned. Instability in the globe inevitably leads to poor economic performance here in the United States. Poor economic performance here in the United States drops our federal revenues significantly. And you can go through the numbers. I've done this. The bottom line is this is bad policy for a couple of reasons, one of which is it's not accomplishing what it's intended to accomplish. And so for that reason, those who are budget hawks should be interested in increasing the defense budget, because increasing the defense budget leads to greater global stability, given the reality that America really is the indispensable nation. It leads to greater global stability, which leads to greater global wealth, which leads to greater tax revenues. I would also add, finishing up on the statement where I was trying to hog the microphone earlier, the structure of the committee is part of the problem with giving the Defense Department the kind of discretion that it ought to have. And it's because people like me don't want to take a chance that their base or their group of soldiers or troops otherwise are somehow going to be adversely affected. And so we'd rather just maintain the status quo by not having BRACs, by not giving management authority where it ought to be given, that sort of thing. So there's a structural problem here in the committee. If you took the average member of Congress and just made this committee full of the average members of Congress as opposed to the members of Congress that have military issues that are politically very important to them, if you did that, I think it'd be a lot easier to get things done. I don't know how structurally you get past the structural problem here, but you really do need to do that. Solving the management issues, though, will not solve the budget problem. The top line's got to be increased dramatically. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to say that.
Thank you so much. Thank all of you and those who did not testify and are here as well. Thank you so much for your dedicated service to this particular process, and I hope it leads fruitful results. Thank you. Hearing is adjourned.